Hey guys, Thomas the Jr. here, aka Mustached Tom, and welcome back to another retrospective review. This time we're moving right along to Digimon Season 4, or also known as Digimon Frontiers. Last time I covered Digimon Season 3, which was proclaimed for the longest time as the best season, and I went over why I think that still maintains while also criticizing the parts that I do think could have been improved upon slightly as well. And the same will be said for this. Well, in terms of it not being, but trying to review it as objectively as possible. With that out of the way, let's get right into it. So, I briefly mentioned in part 3 that the arc, or the transition of change in Digimon turning into humans or fusing with them in the previous case of the end of Season 3, they took that gimmick and they shunted that towards the beginning of this season, making it essentially the entire gimmick through and through. Which, I'm just going to be blunt, on a retrospective and just subjective point of view, I think that this is one of the coolest things that you could have done with Digimon, honestly. The ability to fuse with Digimon, absolutely. I think this is definitely the correct step, was so at the end of Season 3. And capitalizing on that on Season 4 was absolutely the right call. In terms of it being slightly not as coherent, well, we'll talk about all that stuff and how well it, progresses against, I suppose, Season 3, though I don't know if that's as fair. But here we are nonetheless. Anyways, moving right into the character story and all that stuff. So this time around, we're following another gogglehead protagonist in the name of Takaru. I hope I got that right. Takuya, excuse me. Takuya is the main one this time around. He is supported by his version of quote-unquote Matt in Koji. We have our new TK and Tommy, and we have sort of a, I suppose, combination of like a Mimi and Sora and Zoe this time around. And JP's sort of like the new gimmick of the guy who's like consistently hungry, because they didn't have that gimmick in any of the other characters, with the exception of Digimon always being hungry, that is. So that's our cast of characters, at least in the humans. But remember that the humans this time around are doubling up as the Digimon this time around. But they are not alone. They are accompanied by two other Digimon. Bokumon, which is our Encyclopedia Digimon, who updates us on who's the who on what's going on, and our support / comic relief short pants wearing Nanimon. And these two accompany our protagonist as we proceed. But before we even enter the digital world, which we are back into the fray of throwing our tamers into the digital world at the forefront of a season, we begin on a normal day, and our main protagonist is bored out of his wits, and he gets a little call on his phone talking about his potential, and we're going to bring up the word again, destiny. So this is, again, being maintained from all the Digimon seasons prior, that being that the tamers are quote-unquote destined to be the ones. And I've always been on the fence about the word in concept of it, of itself, of destiny, that being something that is quote unquote predestined, rather than, in this case, or in many other cases, more so convenience rather than destiny. Again, destiny sort of alludes to this fated thing, that it's meant to be these people that are going to do this. And there's always something about that that feels a little bit too constrictive in terms of writing. I've always said this about Digimon. It's always sort of like the underskin of like, I'm not sure if that's the right word you want to be using, but I suppose they make it work for the time. Again, because our tamers still have to work towards that goal. It's not like they're gifted with like the ability to just win. I mean, they are gifted with things, but not just the ability to win outright. Anyway, so indeed, our fellow humans end up going into this train station, which seems to be the new hub world between the human world and the digital world, where all of these trains are going back and forth between both worlds, and these are train-based Digimon. So there's like an elevator ride down that leads to this sort of, I guess, sort of gateway, or a location where beings can be spirited away from the human world to the digital world. So that is how they are handling it this time around. So, though the editing is a little bit clunky in the first episode, you do see that all the tamers, if you want to call them that in this, do all end up in the same train. So it's a little bit hectic. We see a bunch of other kids there as well. And they all end up there. And of course, all end up in the digital world. From there, they are then tasked to start finding their spirits, or the spirit evolutions. This is what it will allow them to turn into Digimon. And so far, they're doing what they can, and just kind of, I do get the vibe, at least from rewatching it, that they just kind of go along with it this time around, rather than kind of going through the ordeal of being freaked out as long or whatever. I mean, it's sort of there, I guess, but it's not, it doesn't stick around, I suppose. There is, I think I'm discrediting it. There is like this split between the group, and JP like wanting to initially leave and stuff like that, that's all sort of hinted at, or alluded to in this episode as we move along. But to progress us, indeed, they do start to find these spirit evolutions, which allow them to quote-unquote spirit evolve. Now, before I go any further, and I know this is a side tangent, but I couldn't help but escape. I mean, this isn't something I brought up in any of the previous reviews, because I think it is the target of this particular retrospective review. That being, since Season 3 was the best of the, the set of Digimon seasons, I will probably argue that Digimon Season 4, while not obviously the best season, definitely still, to me, has the best opening out of all the Digimon seasons. I mean, this is a catchy earworm of a song, as compared to the normal Digimon Digital Monsters theme song, which is only slightly remixed in Season 3. That was the only distinction. Here they have added some additional lyrics, and including the prospect of spirit evolution, and it causing them to win the day. Again, quite a catchy theme song. So if there's ever a theme song you want on your playlist, I probably would recommend this one. It is, again, very catchy. Anyway, getting back to the story portion of this review. So, they start collecting their spirits, and along the way, and we're actually met with our quote-unquote antagonist, and then subsequently, or actually even beforehand, we're actually told relatively early by Pokemon himself about the threat, which is a very different sort of style of handling of the season. This time around, we are told that the threat is a Dark Cherubimon, and that he is the one behind all of this. Now, what makes this particular season so fascinating to me is actually what follows from the previous season, is that it's actually a little bit harder than even the first two seasons to mark where exactly the arcs are placed. Now, for those who may not remember those videos or may not have watched them, arcs in this case are distinguished in the first two seasons by the main antagonists that they face in each arc. So, for example, in season 1, it was Devimon, then Edamon, then Myotismon, then Apocalypmon. And those would be the four main arcs in season 1. And season 2 was very much the same. Now, what made season 3 so unique is that the arc was a little bit harder to follow because it sort of still maintained this premise of Digimon entering the human world, which I talked about in that video. This time around, we are told that there's one major threat, though, which is, again, very different from the previous iterations, which I just went over how the first season had several villains, and this one, according to this season, only has one. So what are the arcs split by? Well, from a retrospective point of view, it's actually relatively easy to see what it is. It's actually now in accordance to the spirit evolutions and then the next set of evolutions. You see, this time around, I think this is like an offset of like trying to figure out how to make different evolutions based off of a more limited sort of style. This time around, there's also beast evolutions. So it's very clear, as once we get deep into the spirit evolutions and everyone's gotten theirs, that the beast collection is technically the quote-unquote next arc, if you want to, if you're trying to split this up in between arcs. So it's not necessarily always split between a villain and another villain. But speaking of villains, they're going against other ancient spirit Digimon that are directly the underlings of Cherubimon Dark Mode, or Dark Cherubimon, however which way you want to put it. They are in constant conflict, and the bad guys have the advantage initially when they can slide evolution, that's the slide between spirit and beast, freely when they find their own. They always get the advantages first, so it's sort of like how they sort of keep things, the tension sort of, so it's not necessarily stagnant. It's always like, ooh, will the bad guys get the win this time? Well, luckily the tamers or slash our humans here will find what they need to look for and find it and achieve what they need to achieve. Speaking of which, and speaking of things that Digimon has passed down from season to season, I gotta say, this is another one that seems to be in repeat and depending on the season. Digimon going dark, or evil in this case. This is something that was in season 1, not in season 2 technically, surprisingly. At least I don't remember it off the top of my head if it did happen. But it did happen right back in season 3 with Guillemon, and after what Beelzemon did, I had talked about that in season 3. So here again is that sort of trademark of a Digimon quote unquote going evil, and that is the indication of when at least two of them get their beast evolutions, they have to get them under control, and they indeed have to fight them to like stop them from like hurting each other. Uh, so it's not as quote unquote evil. I guess it's more just out of control, but it's sort of alluding to the same thing, I guess, or close in proximity to it. That I suppose it technically counts as that. And we will see if later seasons will continue to hold that tradition or not. It'll be interesting to keep track of. But nonetheless, so we have our characters, and they have their gimmicks and their personalities, and I told you how they're sort of very similar to season 1 in a lot of respects. And they sort of get by dealing with the villains, always by again finding what they need to find, or succeeding in where they need to succeed. And that's not to say that this season isn't trying to pull from other things in a good way, because they clearly try to mimic what they did in season 2 with Ken, and that having Koji having a twin brother who is in the form of a Digimon for a long period of time. And then having him come to that realization that he doesn't need to be in that dark form and work for these dark Digimon and so on and so forth. This is just more of a form of just being dark instead of, being in this darkened state on your own accord, rather than being tricked into it because of dark things that have happened in your past. So slightly different, but once again a slightly condensed version of that story is once again present here too. So I'm not gonna say just because this is sort of repeating on things that Digimon have done before, that doesn't automatically make it bad. In fact, I would just say it gets by really solidly. I would actually argue that it's good. Not great, maybe not as solid as season 3 perhaps. But it's holding up. It holds up, I feel. And on a rewatch particularly too, again, in accordance with sort of this whole shtick that I'm doing and going through each season of Digimon in a retrospective sort of way. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised how well this actually held up. I think it held up a lot stronger than I remember it being from the first time I watched it. Or maybe I just haven't seen it in a while, and I just forgot, oh, this is actually, not even that bad. It's actually, again, pretty decent. But, again, we go over gimmicks and premises and all that stuff over and over again. And what did you know it? This one has another one as well. But it happens way significantly later on. Now, I will say that one thing that I will oppose is that the whole thing between Koji and his brother isn't as presented as dark as some of the previous seasons, so maybe that's why it doesn't hold as much weight as the previous seasons. This sort of it's not as dark as it could potentially be. Maybe that's why some people may find it a little off-putting, maybe. I wouldn't place it on Digimon turning in the gimmick. I think that's a bit of an unfair criticism. Again, I think that's the coolest aspect of this season, so I would dare to say that I wouldn't suggest that is the case. Anyway, moving right along and talking about one of the gimmicks that I was just about to this gimmick that I was gonna talk about, or a repeat of things that have been repeated in the past, is the presence of a royal knight. Now, for those of you who don't know anything about Digimon, in Digimon there are 13 royal knights accumulated across 13 particularly strong Digimon that, I guess, created this order, if you will, to maintain a peace, quote unquote, within the digital world. So not quite the 12 Sovereign from Season 3, but sort of in that vein, but I guess cooler, I guess. So, for those who might not be aware, in Season 1, while it didn't happen in the season, it did happen in the movie, we got our first introduction to the first Royal Knight, that being Omnimon. That being the combination of Agumon and Gabumon DNA digivolving to Omnimon. And so, from there, we can move on to Season 2, which would actually maintain in the season this time around. This time it would be Vmon finding, alongside with Davis, the Digi Egg of Miracles, as it's called, and transforming into Magnamon. So that's 2 of the Royal Knights right there. Moving along in Season 3, we have Takato and Guillemon fusing, as I was alluding to earlier, but they actually do fuse into one of the other Royal Knights, Galliantmon. So that's 3. Here, however, in Season 4, 2 more Royal Knights are introduced here, but they are antagonist rather than protagonist, and that means they're trying to get in our hero's way. And this is, by the way, after the Cherubimon arc. Yeah, because, surprise, surprise, he's actually not the final villain. After, again, maintaining getting the Beast and Spirit evolutions, they do eventually confront Cherubimon Dark, eventually do defeat Cherubimon Dark, and then it is alluded to once they recognize that their Digimon and them are still combined, or they're still in the digital world, that there still must be something that must be done, as they sort of conclude. And indeed, that is the case. Introduction to the final arc / true final villain of this season, Lucemon. An angelic-looking Digimon that turns more and more into a demon as it evolves. And again, as the combination of its 2 Royal Knights that are its underlings, because they believe, at least one of them strongly does, is that that they need to be faithful, and the other one's a bit more on the fence. I believe one of them is Crusadermon, and then the other one is not Dukemon, because that's Galliantmon's Japanese name. I would actually have to look it up, because I don't remember the other one's name off the top of my head, even after watching it. But whatever, I'll just say that it's Crusadermon and the other one that's with, quote-unquote, her. And she's the more doubtful of the 2 of them, by the way. Questioning Lucemon's intentions and, whether or not they will even fulfill their desires, which, surprise, surprise, Lucemon doesn't do, and in fact, even just evaporates them, sucks up their spirits, and makes their way to both world domination / destruction of the digital world and reset. So, at this point, the Tamers have also achieved something new. This is sort of a combination of both a lot of the gimmicks and premises of the past. It's not only like a spirit slash Digimon turning into the Tamers turning into Digimon, but it's sort of like a fusion on top of that as well, is what they unleash at the end arc here as well. They all give their spirits to the two main characters, that being Takuya and Koji here, and with all of their spirits and even the dark spirits being contributing to their spirits as well, they all form together to create a Digimon called Suzanomon. This form is achieved, I think, twice or three times at the end arc here, before finally defeating the final version of Lucemon. And thus we get, perhaps I will also not deny that it's a bit of a weirder, quote-unquote, sadder ending or melancholic ending than the previous, because they try to allude that the spirits and the humans are like separating, and there, I guess, there is sort of this sort of acknowledgement that it's not quite the same. It doesn't quite hit as hard as knowing that they were kind of the same being rather than two separate entities. So this goodbye doesn't feel as impactful, and I do understand that and acknowledge that right here. But I do also, would argue, understand a little bit of what they're trying to go for there. Like, the spirits were still, quote-unquote, alive, if you were. They were just inhabiting them to a degree. Because other Digimon could do it. It's in the show. We see it. So, it's not like they don't exist. It's just, again, it's a bit more of a sort of a, I don't know if I want to say use the word godly, but, or like an outwardly spiritual presence. Because again, it definitely has a different vibe from the previous iterations of sort of the goodbye, which is sort of like the antithesis of every ending season of Digimon thus far anyways, is sort of to recreate or do a different interpretation of that type of ending. Always this bittersweet type of ending of knowing that the adventure is truly over and that the separation of Digimon and Tamer once more must occur. So, in closing, and to sort of reframe this again, I would say that this season is fine. If not having its own, things that I think are really cool about it. Again, its own gimmick and opening theme song are very catchy and very cool in its, prospect. I will say that it does follow the formula of Digimon rather safely this time around, I will say, though. Holding a slightly lighter themes, not as dark as I mentioned prior. So again, mayhaps that may be one of the reasons that maybe it didn't catch as many people, maybe, I don't know. But I would still recommend it all this time later, as we continue our retrospective review. And that will close off this one for Season 4. So next up, of course, is Digimon Season 5. And we will continue to do so again until we catch up to the latest season of Digimon. But until that time, We will close it out here, and if you ended up enjoying this retrospective review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers. Second and third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me on the channel directly. And fourth to my Discord server, where you can join, collab, and chill, and do all that cool stuff. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye!